Now that I've seen it, I don't walk the woods anymore. I saw the devil's dog. Tonight, I bring you an account of an upright canine-like creature that once again took place in Staffordshire. Our witness tonight is named Polly, and she said, "Hi Deb. First of all, thank you for your great work. It really does help people like me who are looking for answers after experiencing some of the strangest things. You hear the stories from other people, and when you share them, it helps me, and it's really appreciated. I was actually going to contact you regarding an encounter I had about 1:30 a.m. at the tail end of July 2020, but I hadn't quite plucked up the courage. In fact, I only started following your Facebook page earlier, and I felt a prompt to just get in touch and speak to you. Now I listen to a lot of shows on YouTube, but I find it difficult to catch live shows due to commitments of work, so I only caught the last section of your other live show. Once I was able to sit down and watch it, I then went back to the beginning and I listened to it in its entirety. Oh my God, I was so shocked, yet so very, very relieved too. Two of the reports you mentioned are really close to where I had my experience, and I'm really struggling to explain it. And what I found even more uncanny was the fact that you talked about cryptids using the waterways, the streams and the brooks and the rivers to move around unseen. This is very similar to what happened to me, and I absolutely believe this is how the creature I encountered found me. And he scared me for a few days later, about 6 miles away in Shifnal. But this time, it happened in a town park on the playing fields. I was already shaken up by the first event, and I was actually thinking about what had happened when I believe I had my second encounter with the same creature. My first encounter was right by some rural traffic lights. They used to flow single file traffic as you drive over a section of the River Wharf, quite rural. I didn't realise there was a brook or a stream there until after the event. I was visiting a relative and I'd moved between the home I was staying at and their place. I'm not a morning person, and the summer was beautiful, 2022, and I love to walk in nature. I find it soothing, and up until this happened, I've never really given much thought to the places I walk. It's only afterwards, when you see the sheer size and power of these things, that you suddenly become hyper aware of your surroundings at all times. That never goes away. It doesn't leave you. It was really hot that summer and people were not walking the dogs in the daytime. They were taking them out later. And I left my relative in the early hours of the morning when it's much cooler than in the heat of the day. And I'd walk my dog then before getting in the car and setting off home. I was on a B road, and in the daytime it can get busy. It's the main road through the area. But in the early hours, you see very little traffic. And that's when I used to love to be out and about. But not anymore. The road is like many rural roads in the UK. It isn't lit at night, and it winds around corners through farm fields and woodlands. There are small streams and brooks, and there's a small bridge, as I said, and you have to use the traffic lights there. It was still really warm. I had the windows of the car partially down to help with the breeze for me and the dog. Unfortunately, I was travelling alone, and it was just me and the dog when I slowed down as the lights were green. And for quite some time, I was feeling really spooked, and I'd felt the same way each time I'd passed there. I'd waited here as I visited my relative every night for weeks, so I was hoping if I went slow enough, the lights wouldn't be on red, because sometimes it takes a long time for the lights to change. I was also putting down some of the front windows of the car due to that spooky feeling. As I came around the sweeping bend, which takes you past the woodlands, I looked and I could see something there. And I thought to myself, is that a shire horse? Due to its sheer size and bulk. And it walked straight out into the road. Because it was really big and tall, I just assumed that it was a very valuable animal that had escaped from a private residence somewhere. And maybe the owners were not aware of this. I'm used to animals and horses. So I stopped, turning my lights down low so I didn't spook it, and I reversed my car to get a better look at it, as I couldn't work out what sort of animal it was, other than it being a huge horse. My first thought was that I needed to help this animal so it wasn't stuck in the road, or got hit by an oncoming car or got spooked and broke its leg. I was going to phone the police or the highways and report it and wait until they came. I sincerely wish I hadn't stopped and seen what I did, and I doubt that I would have been having any further encounters if I hadn't stopped. And I realised there was no way I was phoning the police after I got a better look at it. I couldn't see the back end of this horse or its back legs, so I looked closely and I looked at the big hump back of a horse, and I could see an elongated face or a snout, and it did have ears on top of its head, but it was standing up on two legs. So at that point, my brain scanned all the animals I could think of that had an upright stance, a kind of humped stance, bent legs, fur, ears on head. Was it a kangaroo? And then I thought, well, why didn't it bounce or bob as it moved? Because kangaroos have a very distinct way of moving, and this didn't move like that. It crossed the road with a normal gait and went off into the greenery on the other side. And at this point, I'm still thinking, this is just an animal, and I couldn't recognise it. I knew if I left it alone out there, it'd come to harm. And because there were no other cars on that lane, I chanced reversing the car to see if I could keep an eye on where it went while I phoned the police to report it. For all it was warm, it was really dark, and I was straining to look into the shrub and the bushes that were there. The night was still, and what was weird was there was no sound of it moving off into those bushes. I listened as I had the back window open, and it was silent outside. So I stayed there for a minute, trying to scan the trees, and I was convinced I could see this horse, and it was just that its limbs were hidden by the trees. The tree was really big and gnarly, and the branches hung down due to the summer foliage. I kept my eye on the tree, and I pulled forward so I could reverse a bit and see it in my reverse lights more clearly. And as I did so, I realised the gnarly tree was a chest, and the thick branches were its arms and legs. It had defined muscle. You could see its pecs, like a man who works out, but much bigger. It had the build of a big, strong muscle man like Arnold Schwarzenegger. It had a very ripped chest, and the muscles were clear. It had hair and visible skin. And to be honest, at that point, I knew it wasn't a horse. And I thought, oh shit. And it moved. And at that point, I just didn't look up. I put the car into gear and I drove forward. I can't tell you why I did that. It just happened. I don't even remember checking to see what colour the traffic lights were. All I could think about at that point was getting out of there as best and as fast as I could. There were no other cars out there, no lights of any kind. I was in a panic, shutting all the windows at once. I was so shaken up, I just couldn't get them to work, all while trying to pull myself together and drive out of there. And then I realised I couldn't shut the back window that I'd opened for the dog. When this thing made a move, my dog whimpered in the back. She's a working dog. She's used to farm, woods and fields. Nothing scares her at all. I just could not work out what it was. I think it was the shock of not being able to see that it wasn't a horse. I wasn't scared until I realised that. Any animal I came across didn't fit its description. I've seen a large black cat, and even that didn't fit its size, bulk, or description, or the way it moved. It was not moving like a cat. It wasn't feline in any way. It didn't cross my mind to look in the rearview mirror to see if it was following me, because in my head, I was scared it'd try and climb in the window. I floored it and just concentrated on getting home. My hair was flapping, and so was the dog's ears. I swore every swear word known to man, and I was just completely crapping myself. I got home, and I was really shaken. I didn't sleep a wink at night at that point. It just played and played in my head, and I couldn't stop it. And for days afterwards, I felt like I could feel it. I felt like I was being watched. I was so afraid I changed my whole routine. I didn't want it to know where I was, and the idea of sitting at those traffic lights filled me with dread. A few days later, I decided to walk my dog in a different place, closer to the brook, and I'd stay away from the woodlands. There's an area that's closer to people, and you do see people here enjoying the place with their dogs or playing sports. I was across the brook at a quieter area, but it's by no means out in the fields. I'm sitting by the bike track playing with my dog, and the track gives you a bit of elevation. And I'm sitting there telling myself that I needed to stop being so paranoid all of the time. And all the time I'm sitting there, I could feel that it was around. It's going on dusk, and I'm having a full conversation with myself, trying to calm myself down. And to kind of shake that feeling, I had a bit of a walk back to the car, which was on the road. So I'm sitting there, and I start to hear foliage breaking and branches snapping in the small wooden coppice next to me. I began to feel that whatever was doing this was trying to get my attention. I talked myself out of that by deciding it was just probably a landowner cleaning up in the woodland. And at the time, trying to prove I just had the jitters, I decided to mind speak to it, as you would with spirit. I knew I wouldn't get an answer back, and then I'd feel a bit braver and I'd stay out a bit longer. I'm still struggling with all this, all these months on, but that's not how it played out. When I spoke to it, I got an answer. I said to myself, okay, if you're real, break something now. And it did. I did this a number of times, and each time I'd hear a crack or a break. And when I didn't say anything, there was silence. I didn't freak out, which was strange. In fact, I started to relax a bit. So much so that I got up and I walked closer to the brook, closer to the wood line. And as I was walking, I asked it what it was. I said, "What are you? Who are you? I don't understand who you are." And at that moment, it put a thought in my head. A thought that took me back to a memory I'd not thought about in years. A memory for when I was a young girl and I was out with my father. It wasn't something I'd forgotten. I just hadn't thought about it in a long time. And it was a bit of a scary event, to be honest. And so many weird and scary things happened when I was young. This memory kind of paled in comparison. But thinking back on it, it made sense. I didn't really bring it to mind myself. It suddenly popped into my mind. I was about 5 and I saw something really scary. My dad would walk miles with me out in the fields, and I'd pester my dad to take me to a place called Devil's Hole. And there's a few times he said no, but I was fascinated with it because the name's so strange. It's like this huge rocky hole in the fields, and there are lots of mine tunnels and natural tunnel systems. I had run off a little way up the track, and Dad was behind me when I stopped and asked, "What's that?" I could see an animal up ahead, but I had no idea what it was. But I sure my dad would. He said, "Come on, we're going. That's a wolf." And it was a wolf, but it was also standing on 2 legs. I didn't think it was a wolf. I thought, and I have called it ever since, the devil's dog. I called it that because, for all it had a wolf's head, fur, and legs, it also had shoulders and a body like a man. We just got out of there and said nothing about it, but it really scared me. A few weeks later, my dad got into trouble because I was out with Mum and I saw an Irish wolfhound, and I was terrified and freaked out. I had to tell Mum I was scared. Mum tried to explain it away as an oversized, mangy fox, but my dad was insistent it was a wolf, and to me, it was the devil's dog. I called it that until I saw a film a few years later, and I realised what I'd seen. Do you remember the old pirate DVDs that you could rent from the market? Well, my friend had one and asked me to watch it, And I saw the cover photo, and that was enough for me. It looked exactly like the thing. I knew what I saw then was a werewolf, and that scared me so much, I kind of shut down at that point. I just pushed it away for years until it was put into my head next to that brook. I don't think people outside the UK realise how, when we were growing up, there was no mention of cryptids, never heard of Dogman, werewolves, or Bigfoot. There was the odd American TV show, but nothing in the show that we watched here. Some people in the UK still call it the abominable snowman to this day because there's such a lack of information out there. As this thing put that image into my mind, I asked it a question, or I challenged it, I suppose. In my mind, I said, if you're one of those creatures, push over that big old birch tree. Nothing happened. And then the tree started to shake a bit. I looked to see if any of the people in the park seemed to be paying any attention to what was happening where I was. And I realised I was a woman out alone, and it could grab and take me in seconds, and nobody would know. They would just find my car in the car park. And at that moment, everything clicked into place. I am certain what I was connecting with was some kind of being, like a dogman or a Sasquatch. It suddenly dawned on me just how serious this could turn, and I walked away to my car. I still had to go and visit my relative before going home, and at this point, I'd not slept a full night's sleep in weeks. I was living on my nerves, questions constantly being asked in my head. I was worn out, I was shaken up and confused. It got so bad, I got in the habit of staying up all night and sleeping after 9 a.m. in the morning until late afternoon. And even then, I wasn't getting any rest. I tried to tell my friend about it, but she brought up the fact that I'd seen pixies many years ago. And I did. That really happened. But it's also something nobody believes when I tell them. Yet they're the most natural things here in the UK. It felt awful to be going through this. And when I told people, they'd look at me vacantly or just kind of laugh at me. I was so scared that I avoided that part the next day. I started to change loads of things about my routines. It really did have that much of an effect on me and my mental health. I'd asked myself over and over if it really happened. I'd doubt myself, even though I knew it had happened. It makes you feel ill. But where I was living, there are not that many places where you can run your dog off lead. So a day or so later, I had to go back to the park. I had to just talk myself out of all of this. The tree that I'd asked it to break had one of its biggest branches snapped off. It had been really dry, warm, and sunny for weeks. It was the end of July during the heat wave. There was no natural reason for that huge bough to be down. Normally, my dog heads straight for the brook as she likes me to throw the ball in for her to retrieve, especially when it's warm, but that didn't happen that day. I have a picture in that tree. It scared me that much. On the second encounter at the park, as I explained, there was some form of mind communication, and I think this is what I'm finding most uncomfortable about discussing. I asked how it found me, and I got this mocking laugh for a reply, and it said, I found you by the stream. And I went to Google and pulled up a map, and I found the river wharf right underneath where my car had been sitting at those traffic lights. I'm on a little bridge and the water runs underneath. The mind speak had not happened since, but I know that it has also been very close to me multiple times since then. About 7 weeks ago, I am convinced that it growled at me when I was out walking my dog in the evening. This has been the only time it has made a menacing noise, and it scared the crap out of me. I don't go anywhere now, other than really public places. I rarely go out at night anymore. My relatives returned home, and I stayed here to care for them. Close by, there's a natural cycle route and a park, and if I'm being brave that day, I can go around dusk, and I will be honest, if it's eerie there, it's not nice. I stopped using the back garden at home because I'm convinced it's watching me out there. So much so, I will only use the front garden. The last time I was in the back garden, and I am convinced I saw a head watching me over the hedge. You could see it moving. And in the daylight the next day, I went and I stood where it had been. I know it was watching me from the back garden. It was watching me, and it knows where I live. You can't get into those fields at the back of the house. They're private and all fenced off. The fences are between 6 to 8 feet tall, and that doesn't seem to be a problem to it. So I went to the park one night, and there were lots of lovely trees, and some of them are a couple of 100 years old. And as I passed those trees, something growled at me. It wasn't a dog or a cat, and it was deep, and I could feel it in my chest. I checked out large cat growls online, and they were not the same. I also knew it wasn't doing the best growl that it could. It was holding back. It had a feeling to it, and for nights afterwards, I knew it was near the house. I turn on all the lights when I can. I did tell it to stay away, and I haven't had to do anything to the house itself, but it's watching me from that hedge. My dog's a Doberman, and she's a working dog. She will chase and kill anything that runs, so I have to be careful with her off lead. Hence, it's not easy to walk her anywhere. She's scared of nothing, but she will not go into that back garden. She won't even pee. Sometimes she just stands there and barks, and this is not normal behaviour for her. I remember my dad telling me when we were walking that if I ever went into woodland and it was silent, I should get out of there quickly. In the early 90s, my dad was out on one of his walks and he came home really shaken up. And at first, we were laughing because we thought he was making it up. But he said he was stoned out of the woods the whole way through, and something chased him, was pelting him with stones. He said it chased him out of the woods. My dad's handy. He's ex-army. He's a big bloke and he can handle himself. He is convinced it wasn't a man or a gamekeeper that followed him that day. Whatever it was, he described it as big. He was really scared by that incident, and it put him off walking in certain areas. All of this has really stressed me out prior to these events. I had no idea that creatures like these existed, especially not in the UK. I didn't know what cryptids were, and I did not listen or watch anything to do with that subject ever. Now I'm obsessed to learn everything I can in order to understand what it is, what that creature I saw was. I told a few people at the time, but the reaction I got wasn't good. People find it funny and they start laughing, or they look at you like you're bonkers. I've only spoken to one person who knows about these things since it happened. Someone else I know also told me about a strange experience they had very close to the area where I encountered the creature, and this experience happened within days of mine. And although it was a month or so after it happened when they told me about it, I hadn't told them that I'd seen anything. I do wonder if it's the same creature or the same species that we saw. I also had multiple strange childhood experience for over 30 years beforehand, and it's where I grew up, and my family have lived here for generations. Although I think about it a lot, and without a doubt I do that every single day, I still feel uncomfortable talking about it because it's so bizarre and it sounds so unbelievable. I do think the creature I saw was a dogman of some sort, but I can't be sure because I did not see its facial features. I'm very keen to share my first encounter with you and others, though, as I'm hoping someone else might have encountered something similar. I'm hoping to find, some kind of backup, I guess. I'm just still really uncomfortable with what happened after that. I'm still not sure whether I can fully believe it myself at times. It has drastically changed my life and how safe and comfortable I feel now. So it's not something I can just put behind me and move on. It's also opened Pandora's box about some of my childhood experiences and made me want answers on all sorts of things now. What is strange is that I moved away to another county for many years. I'd only been back in the area about 7 weeks when it happened. So I'm very uncomfortable walking with my dog out and about. And I've completely stopped walking in the woodlands and rural locations that I loved as a child. I'm very sensitive And I've had many paranormal experiences though, but I'm struggling with this event because the creature I saw seemed to me to be flesh and blood, if that makes sense. Best regards, Polly Dragonfly.